Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something, well, something pretty radical. A theory that could totally flip what we think we know about history. We're going to look at the research of Neil Ashok. His claim that our whole timeline for human civilization could be off by tens of thousands of years. I mean, that's a huge claim to kick things off with, right? Oak isn't just talking about a little tweak to the history books here. Nope, he's arguing the entire foundation is wrong, that the real story of humanity goes back way, way further than we think. We're talking thousands, even tens of thousands of years. So you gotta ask, how does he even begin to build a case like that? Well, you can think of his method as kind of like CSI for the ancient world. He's taking hard, scientific data from genetics, from astronomy, and smashing it together with a totally fresh look at ancient texts. He treats them not like fairy tales, but like they could be actual eyewitness accounts. And he's really following the advice of physicist John Wheeler. You know, that idea of finding the weirdest thing and just diving right in. So instead of shrugging off the parts of ancient stories that just don't make any sense, he does the opposite. He zooms right in on them. Because for him, those strange little details, those anomalies, that's exactly where the clues to our forgotten past are hiding. So the whole investigation really kicks off with some super strange descriptions found in India's oldest epics. Things that seem completely out of place in the history we're all taught. Okay, so get this. A four-tusked elephant. Sounds like something straight out of a fantasy novel, right? It's so easy to just dismiss that as pure imagination. But Oak asks a totally different question. What if it wasn't imagination? What if it was a memory of something real? And it turns out there actually was a real four-tusked elephant called the Gomphother. The critical part, fossil records show it went extinct about 11,000 years ago. Now for Oak, this is a massive piece of evidence. If the people writing the Ramayana were describing a real animal they'd seen, then the text had to have been written when that animal was still walking the earth.
And here's another head-scratcher. You think of India, you think of tigers, right? But the Rig Veda, which was composed right in the heart of what is now tiger country, never mentions a tiger. Not a single time. How could the authors of this foundational text completely miss the most iconic animal in their own backyard?
This is where it gets really fascinating. Modern genetic research shows that tigers only migrated into the Indian subcontinent somewhere around 16 to 17,000 years ago. So what if the Rig Veda doesn't mention tigers for the simplest reason you could think of? What if it was written before they even got there? Suddenly, that one little omission could push the date of this ancient text back by millennia. All right, let's switch gears a bit. The next piece of the puzzle doesn't come from an ancient book, but from inside our own bodies, from our DNA. You know, our DNA is like a history book. It holds scars from our past. And geneticists found a huge one dating back about 7,500 years ago. They call it a population bottleneck, which basically means a massive drop in genetic diversity. But here's the really weird part. This event seems to have only hit the male line, the Y chromosome, and the epicenter was right in and around India. So that just begs the question, right? What on earth could happen that would wipe out such a huge number of men from the gene pool, but leave the women relatively untouched? So Oak went digging through the ancient texts, looking for a story that matched this exact genetic fingerprint. A huge, catastrophic event in that specific part of the world at that specific time that resulted in a massive loss of male life. And he thinks he found a match in the epic of the Mahabharata. It describes this enormous war, a war so devastating it only lasted 18 days, but led to an almost unimaginable death toll. The text itself claims that 4 million male warriors were killed. And here's the kicker. Using astronomical references from inside the text, Oak actually dates that war to 5561 BCE, which is almost exactly 7,500 years ago. The timing, the location, the specific impact on the male population, it all seems to line up. Could this ancient story really be the explanation for that genetic scar we all carry in our DNA? Okay, hold on, because the timeline gets pushed back even further from here. This is where Oak starts connecting clues not just from the land, but from the oceans and the stars. He zooms in on a text called the Maitrayani Upanishad. There's this one passage in it that describes the ocean dramatically pulling back. The exact words it uses are that the seas were drying up. Now, this is a perfect example of Oak's whole method. We know from solid geological records that for the last 20,000 years, as the ice caps have been melting, global sea levels have been consistently rising. So a text talking about the seas drying up just couldn't have been written during that time. To find a period where sea levels were dropping in a major way, you have to go back way, way further, all the way to around 35,000 years ago. But wait, it's not just the sea levels. The text also describes two very specific things happening in the sky at the exact same time. So, using modern astronomy software to basically wind back the clock, Oak looked for a single moment in time when all three of these things, the receding seas and those two specific celestial events, happened at once. And he found only one window where they all converged, 35,000 years ago. So, what does our history actually look like if you start to assemble all of these different clues from all these different scientific fields? Well, when you put it all together, you get a completely rewritten timeline. It's pretty dramatic. On the left, that's what we're used to seeing. The Vedas around 1500 BCE. The Mahabharata and Ramayana, if they're considered historical at all, are usually placed around 1000 BCE. But Oak's proposed timeline on the right, it pushes these dates back by thousands, even tens of thousands of years. It completely reframes them, not as recent myths, but as possible records from a civilization that's far more ancient than we've ever dared to imagine. So here's how that new timeline would look. You start 35,000 years ago with those incredible astronomical observations. Then you move to the events of the Ramayana about 14,000 years ago, and then to the Mahabharata War 7,500 years ago. What's crucial here is that Oak insists this isn't just a theory based on belief. It's a timeline built by cross-referencing clues from over 20 different fields of science, all pointing in the same, very old direction. So, what's the big takeaway from all of this? Why does it even matter? Well, this research really forces us to question a fundamental assumption we all make, that clear line we draw between myth and history. What if some of the stories we've always written off as just fantasy were actually incredibly sophisticated records of our own deep past, just waiting for us to learn how to decode them? And ultimately, that's the big question Oak's research leaves us with. It suggests that the story we've been telling ourselves about our past might just be incomplete, and that the clues to a much grander, much older human story might have been hiding in plain sight this whole time.